I still remember the exact time, 6:12 a.m., because that was the moment my front door shook under 3 hard blows, and my life split into a before and an after. I thought the police were at the wrong apartment, until one of them said my name, pulled up a photo from a hit-and-run scene, and told me I was under arrest. What I didn't know then was this. The person who had set me up knew my schedule, my habits, and exactly how to make the lie look real. My name is Elena Mercer. I'm 34, I work in digital risk analysis, and until that morning, I believed the most dangerous thing in my life was burnout. I believed deadlines could bury you, office politics could poison you, and family could exhaust you. But I still thought family was family. Flawed, difficult, unfair sometimes, but still the place where the knife would stop. Now, I was wrong. A few months before my arrest, my life had started moving in a direction my younger sister, Ava, could not stand. I'd been promoted into a position I had worked years for. It came with a better title, a better salary, and the kind of respect my father only understood when it could be measured in money. At dinner that week, he talked about my promotion like it was his own achievement. He barely looked at me, but he kept repeating the number attached to my raise. My mother smiled the way she always did when she wanted peace more than truth. And Ava lifted her glass, said she was proud of me, and held the smile 1 second too long. That was the thing about Ava. If you didn't know her, you'd think she was warm, funny, a little restless maybe. The kind of woman who could turn on charm fast enough to make you feel guilty for ever doubting her. But I knew the version of her that surfaced when nobody was watching, the one who treated every compliment I received like something stolen from her, the one who never forgot a comparison, the one who could turn a family story into a private scorecard without saying a word. Looking back, the signs had started long before the arrest. Small things went missing. Not enough to send me into panic, just enough to make me question my own memory. A key card, a lipstick case, a charging cable I knew I'd left in my work tote. Then there were the moments that made my skin tighten for reasons I couldn't explain. I'd leave my parents' house and feel like someone had watched me walk to my car. Where I'd show up at my regular gym and catch a glimpse of someone crossing the parking lot in sunglasses and a baseball cap, only to tell myself I was being dramatic. Life gets loud when you're tired. You learn to doubt yourself before you doubt the people closest to you. That was my first mistake. The second was assuming envy always looks loud. Sometimes it looks patient. Sometimes it studies you. Sometimes it waits until it knows which thread to pull. The officers led me into the hallway in a t-shirt, sweatpants, and socks. My neighbors' doors stayed closed, but I could feel them listening. One officer asked if I owned a gray sedan. I said yes. Another asked where I was the night before between 9 and 10:30. I told him I had been home on a client video call with a Singapore team. He barely reacted, and he just tightened his grip on my arm and said, "Save it for downtown." At the station, I was told a woman had been struck in a crosswalk a little after 9:20. Witness description, female driver. My license found near the scene. Anonymous caller said the driver looked panicked and fled. The victim, Diane Holloway, was the wife of a retired homicide detective. The room changed after that detail. I could feel it. The urgency sharpened. The assumption settled. I wasn't just a suspect in a traffic case anymore. I was the woman who had hit the wife of someone connected to law enforcement. I repeated my alibi 3 times. I gave them names, meeting records, the calendar invite, the call platform we used, the exact team members who could confirm I was online. One detective wrote it down. But he looked at me with the kind of skepticism that means he had already begun arranging the facts in a cleaner story than the truth. My license at the scene, a frightened female driver, a victim tied to a former detective. My explanation was messy. Their version was easy. That's one of the cruelest things about being framed. The lie doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be believable long enough to drag you under. I was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell that smelled like bleach and old fear. I sat on a bench and tried to slow my breathing. I remember staring at the floor drain and thinking, this cannot be how my life ends up. Not because I believe the truth always wins, but because everything about it felt assembled. Too neat, too targeted. My mind kept circling one question. Oh, who knew enough about me to build a case that fast? A few hours later, a public defender had barely introduced herself when I was told bond had already been posted. I stepped into the corridor and found my father's attorney waiting for me, coat buttoned, expression calm, like he was there to handle a scheduling conflict. He said my father didn't want this to become a media issue. He said I should come straight to their house, keep quiet, and let the family manage things. The family. That word landed wrong. I hadn't called my parents. I hadn't called anyone. My phone had been taken, and even if I had gotten one call, I wouldn't have used it on them. Yet somehow my father's lawyer knew where I was, what I was accused of, and got to me before investigators had even looked seriously at the digital record that could have cleared me. Yet on the drive back to my apartment, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from relief, from recognition. Something in this had started before the police knocked on my door. The first thing I did when I got inside was open the building security app tied to my account. I used it for package alerts, guest access, and camera logs in the lobby. There had been a login to my profile at 3:18 a.m. from a device I didn't recognize. The IP trace wasn't exact, but the location tag attached to the account activity pointed to one area, the neighborhood where my parents lived. I sat down so fast I nearly missed the chair. People talk about betrayal like it arrives with thunder. For me, it arrived as a tiny gray line of text on a screen. At first, I tried to reason my way out of it. Maybe my father had gotten into my account after hearing I'd been arrested. Maybe the lawyer asked for details. Maybe there was an explanation that didn't involve the worst thing I was beginning to suspect. Then another memory came back. 2 weeks earlier, I had stopped by my parents' place after the gym. Ava was there, pretending to scroll through her phone while asking casual questions about my schedule. How late had I been working? Was I still taking those Singapore calls from home? Did my building still use the same guest access system? I'd answered without thinking. She had smiled and called me predictable in that teasing way families use when they mean more than they say. I went back further. 3 months earlier, at that same gym, my wallet had felt lighter when I got home. I checked it and noticed my license was missing. I tore my apartment apart, then called the gym, then assumed I had dropped it somewhere stupid. I ordered a replacement and moved on. At the time, it felt annoying. Now it felt surgical. The next morning, I requested a copy of my meeting logs from work. Because of the kind of clients I handled, our sessions were time-stamped, archived, and cross-referenced with sign-in records. I had been on camera from 8:57 p.m. to 10:06 p.m. the night of the crash. There had been one brief moment when I muted myself to grab water, but I never left the frame long enough to drive across town, hit someone, and come back. My innocence was sitting in a server, time-stamped and boring, while a cleaner story had nearly sent me to jail. That should have ended it, it didn't. One detective, Marcus Vale, finally called after reviewing the records, and his tone had changed, not warm, not apologetic, but open. He admitted the timeline didn't hold. Then he asked a question nobody else had asked. Was there anyone in my life who might know my routines well enough to use them against me? I said no. Then I said, I don't know. By that afternoon, I drove to the gym and asked to speak with the manager. I told her I was dealing with a legal issue and needed help understanding access records from the week my license vanished. She was hesitant until I gave her the case number. Then she pulled what she could. There was no camera inside the locker room, but there were hallway timestamps and desk notes. The night my license disappeared, someone had requested temporary access because they claimed their sister had left her phone in a locker and was still in the sauna. And the employee on shift had used an override key after the woman answered enough membership questions to sound convincing. She wore a hat, large glasses, said she was in a rush. The employee remembered one other detail. The woman kept thanking her and calling her sweet in that fake, overbright way people do when they need a favor they shouldn't be getting. Ava had always known how to sound harmless. I gave Detective Vale everything: my call logs, my work records, the security app access, the gym timeline. He listened longer than I expected. Then he asked if I had any way of knowing whether my family had financial trouble, debts, or anything that might make them desperate. That question led me somewhere I should have gone years earlier, to the places families tell you not to look. I started with public records, and then the fragments people leave behind without realizing they're leaving them. Property filings, late payments, a small lien attached to one of my father's investment properties, a credit card in my mother's name pushed close to its limit. And Ava. Ava had been in deeper than anyone knew. Short-term loans, shopping balances, a failed business partnership she had lied about for months. She wasn't just jealous, she was cornered. My success wasn't only something she resented anymore, it was something she could use. Once I stopped thinking like a daughter, the pattern became brutal. Ava knew my work hours. She knew I sometimes left my tote half-zipped in gym lockers because I was always in a hurry. She knew I handled sensitive accounts and trusted digital systems more than people. She knew my father would move fast to protect the family name, even if that meant protecting the wrong child. She knew my mother would call it a misunderstanding as long as she didn't have to choose out loud. And maybe the worst part was this: she didn't need everyone to actively help plan it. She only needed to know exactly who would look away. A week later, I went to my parents' house while they were out at lunch. My mother had given me the garage code years ago for emergencies. I don't know what I was looking for. Not at first. Proof, I guess. Something I could hold and hate. I started in Ava's old room because it felt obvious, then almost left because it was too clean, too staged. But in the back of her closet, behind 2 storage boxes, I found a leather notebook tucked inside a canvas shoe bag. And I knew before I opened it that my life was about to change again. The first pages looked harmless: lists, dates, scribbled reminders. But then I saw my name, then my gym schedule, then notes about my work calls with overseas clients, then a line that made my stomach fold in on itself. License first, scene second, make it hers before anyone asks whose car. I had to sit on the floor to keep reading. The notebook wasn't a confession in the dramatic sense. It was worse. It was organized, detached, efficient. Pages of observation, times I left my building, which intersections had poor camera coverage, which route Diane Holloway walked on Thursdays after dinner, notes about drinking, about timing the impact after dark, about how quickly people believe physical evidence when it tells a simple story. There were even lines about my father. When he can fix the first 24 hours if it gets messy, Mom will panic but stay quiet. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. Enough time for the house to feel unfamiliar, like I had wandered into a museum built from the private cruelty of someone who had watched me all my life. People always ask what hurts most in betrayals like this. The answer is never just the act. It's the realization that while you were loving someone in ordinary ways, they were studying you with purpose. I took photos of every page, returned the notebook exactly where I found it, and drove straight to Detective Vale. He read in silence. When he got to the line about the first 24 hours, he looked up at me for the first time, like he understood this wasn't a sibling grudge or a messy family fight. This was conspiracy, premeditation, on a lie designed to survive just long enough to ruin me. There was still one problem. We needed more than a notebook. We needed her voice. The plan was simple enough to sound risky. Detective Vale called Ava and said new evidence had raised questions about my timeline. Because she was family, because she had been supportive, they wanted her help clarifying where I had been in the weeks before the crash, whether I seemed stressed, unstable, distracted. They framed it as an opportunity for her to help me. Of course she agreed. When she arrived at the station, she wore cream-colored trousers and a soft blue blouse, like she was headed to brunch instead of an interview built to break her. My mother came too, wringing her hands. My father arrived 10 minutes later with his attorney, looking irritated more than worried. And it hit me then that some people can witness destruction and still think first about inconvenience. They put us in an interview room with a glass panel, no cuffs, no raised voices, just a recorder, a bottle of water, and the weight of everything I knew. Ava gave her statement first, calm, concerned. She said I had seemed overwhelmed lately, said my job had changed me, said I barely slept, sometimes forgot things, sometimes got short-tempered. She even dabbed at the corner of one eye when she mentioned how much stress I had been under. It was so polished I almost admired it. Almost. Then Detective Vale slid a folder across the table. Inside were stills from my work meeting with timestamps, login records from the building app, the gym access note, photos of pages from the notebook, and he printed large enough that her handwriting looked impossible to deny. Ava stared for half a second too long. My father leaned forward and asked what game this was. My mother said there had to be some misunderstanding. Detective Vale didn't answer either of them. He asked Ava one question. Did she want to revise her statement? She tried the obvious route first. Said the handwriting could be forged. Said I worked in digital systems and could fake logs. Said I had always been jealous of her because people underestimated her. That last one almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, because it was the first honest thing she had said. People had underestimated her, just not in the way she meant. I looked at her and asked the question that had been burning through me for weeks. Why me? Something in her face changed. Not guilt, not fear, and something uglier, relief. Because it was always you, she said. Everything was always about you. When you won, everyone looked at you like the family had finally produced someone worth talking about. Dad used your salary like a trophy. Mom used your discipline to shame me. Even when people pitied me, they were still measuring me against you. Do you know what it feels like to sit at a table your whole life and realize there's no version of the story where you are the one they choose? My mother burst into tears. My father told her to stop talking. Detective Vale told him to let her answer. Ava laughed then, a short, cracked sound. She said the first part had been easy, taking the license, watching my route, borrowing my habits until they fit her plan. She admitted she had been drinking the night of the crash, and she admitted she picked Diane Holloway because of her husband's history with the department. She admitted she knew law enforcement would come down harder and faster if the victim had that connection. She admitted she expected my father to move quickly, not to save me, but to keep the family name clean while the case buried me slowly. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. He said none of this was what it sounded like. Detective Vale asked him whether he had used his attorney to post bond within hours, because he already knew Elena Mercer would be the one arrested. Silence answered for him. What happened next wasn't dramatic. No screaming match, no one lunging across the table, just the heavy collapse of the last lie. My mother covered her mouth. My father stopped making eye contact. Ava finally looked tired, not sorry. Just tired of holding the mask in place. Charges came fast after that. Vehicular assault, evidence tampering, criminal conspiracy, filing a false report through an accomplice still being identified. My father and mother were both investigated for obstruction. My father's phone showed contact with the attorney before my arrest had been processed publicly. My mother had deleted messages, but not well enough. Fragments were recovered, enough to prove panic, awareness, and silence. The months that followed were not satisfying in the neat way people imagine justice will be. They were exhausting. Depositions, court dates, character attacks. Ava's defense tried to paint me as vindictive, ambitious, emotionally cold. A woman so invested in being right that she turned a family tragedy into a performance. That tactic almost worked on some people. Because society still prefers damaged women to be soft, grateful, and easy to pity. The moment you become precise, people call you ruthless. I stayed precise anyway. At trial, Diane Holloway testified from the witness stand with a cane resting against the railing. She said the hardest part wasn't the injury. It was knowing someone had treated her body like a tool in a personal war. The courtroom went very still when she said that, because that was the truth at the center of all of it. This was never just about jealousy. It was about using other human beings like movable pieces. When the verdict came, Ava was found guilty on all major counts. My father took a plea on obstruction-related charges and lost more than he ever thought he could. Reputation, leverage, the illusion of control. My mother received a lesser sentence and years of supervised penalties because the court accepted what everyone already knew. She had not built the crime, but she had chosen silence over conscience. People told me I should have felt victorious. What I felt at first was empty, because a verdict punishes a crime. It does not erase the sound of police at your door. It does not remove the memory of fluorescent lights in a holding cell. It does not return the first version of your trust, the one that existed before you understood how efficiently love can be weaponized by insecure people. For a while, I kept expecting healing to arrive the same way justice had, officially, on paper, with a final date attached to it. Instead, it came in strange, quiet pieces. The first full night I slept without waking at every hallway noise. And the first time I checked my mail and didn't brace for another notice with my name in bold. The first time I admitted out loud that what happened to me was not just a legal nightmare. It was humiliation, violation, grief. That mattered more than I expected. Because when people survive betrayal, they are often praised for resilience before they're ever allowed to name the damage. They get told to move on, stay strong, be grateful it's over. But some wounds stay open when they are denied language. I needed to say it plainly. My sister did not make one bad decision. She built a trap. My parents did not simply freeze in a crisis. They protected the structure that always asked me to carry more and matter less. And I did not overreact by walking away. I survived by finally refusing to stay where I was only valuable as long as I remained useful. I sold the last thing tying me to that version of family, an investment share my father had put in my name years ago to prove he believed in legacy. I used part of the money to help fund Diane Holloway's rehab costs that insurance kept delaying. Not because I owed her, because she had been dragged into my family's sickness, and I needed one part of this story to become something cleaner than revenge. I changed my number, moved buildings, updated every password I had ever recycled out of laziness or trust. I stopped answering messages that began with "family is still family." That sentence means nothing to me now. Fire is still fire. It can warm you or destroy your home. Blood is not moral. Proximity is not loyalty. Shared history is not proof of love. The strangest part is that losing my family did not feel like losing a home. It felt like finally admitting there had never been one there. Today, when I tell people what happened, some of them still ask the wrong question. They ask how I could not see it sooner. I used to feel shame when I heard that. Now I don't. Because the real answer is simple. Most of us are trained to excuse what comes from people we're supposed to love. We call it stress, miscommunication, personality differences, birth order. We hand out softer names because the truth would force action. I know better now. I know that the people closest to you can memorize your goodness and still use it against you. I know that systems often trust what looks neat before they examine what is true. I know that envy inside a family can sit at the dinner table for years and still be dismissed as moodiness, immaturity, or harmless tension. I write until it costs someone almost everything. But I also know this. The day your illusion breaks is not always the day your life ends. Sometimes it is the first honest day of it. I still drink coffee in the mornings. I still work too much some weeks. I still catch myself double-checking locks before bed. Some damage leaves fingerprints. But my life is mine now in a way it never was before. Not because nothing bad can happen again, because I no longer confuse access with love. I no longer confuse sacrifice with virtue, and I no longer wait for people who hurt me to become the ones who save me. They won't. Sometimes the person who saves you is the version of yourself that finally stops explaining away the evidence. That version saved me. And if you have ever been the one in the family who was expected to be the stable one, the forgiving one, the one who absorbed more so everyone else could avoid discomfort, hear me when I say this. Leaving the role is not cruelty. Telling the truth is not betrayal. Protecting your peace is not selfishness. There are people who will call your boundaries cold only because they benefited from your lack of them. Let them talk. Silence helped build the trap that almost destroyed me. Truth built the door I walked out through. I chose that door, and I have never gone back.
Disclaimer: this video is created for the sole purpose of entertainment. All situations, characters, and stories in this video are fictional and are built entirely using artificial intelligence technology. We hope you have a relaxing time.